part of the meeting this evening? Oh, awesome. I'm being informed the recording is happening. Good stuff. I look forward to my incoming YouTube fame. I'm going to switch over and get the share up here. So hopefully this works for everybody. There we go. So you should be looking at a slideshow now. Hopefully that is functioning. Awesome. So my name is Kyle, and as you heard, I am the education coordinator for Wild Ontario here on campus at the University of Guelph, as well as a tour leader for Quest Nature Tours. My career has been in science communication and environmental education, and I am a very avid bird watcher. And I love all aspects of birds. I consider myself a real all-rounder when it comes to birds and bird watching. But one of the things that really fascinates me and really excites me is bird names. So I'm really interested in what we call birds. And I know that doesn't maybe sound logically like a really exciting thing or a thing to be really enthusiastic about. I feel like, we all know some bird names. We use bird names in our day-to-day life, but we probably don't think that much about those names or where they come from or if they matter or even really what they are. But for me, bird names are really, really fascinating and really, really interesting. And so the specific aspect of bird names that I'm going to talk about tonight is one that maybe most people have never thought of, and that is one-word birds. So something that I am very excited about and very passionate about is birds which have common English names which contain only one single word. And it maybe doesn't sound that exciting or that unusual. And maybe when you hear that in your head, you start thinking about some examples of one-word birds that come to your mind. And that's great. But I'm here to warn you that some of the examples that you're thinking of maybe aren't actually one-word birds at all. If you think about birds that you refer to by a single word, the ones that probably come to mind first are some of the most familiar birds to you. So you might think of things like birds in your backyard that you refer to with a single word, things like cardinals or robins or chickadees. And absolutely, when we're familiar with a bird, we often do default to using a single word to refer to it. The same way that, I don't refer to my father by his first and last name, or I guess his name at all. It's probably not a great example. But the point is that your family and friends, you just refer to by a single name or sometimes a nickname. And that's true of the robins and cardinals and chickadees in your backyard as well. Now, if you know a little bit about those birds, you know that their proper names have some qualifiers. So instead of a cardinal, we have a northern cardinal. And instead of a robin, American robin. And instead of chickadee, in your backyard, you're looking at black-capped chickadees. And that's because there's more than one kind of chickadee. So it's fine in your backyard when you know what kind of chickadee you're talking about. But if we're going to describe that black-capped chickadee to somebody who lives somewhere else, we have to use its full name to distinguish it from all the other chickadees that live in the world as well. So if a lot of our familiar birds that we refer to using a single word actually have common names that use multiple words, you might be starting to think a little further afield, maybe about some more exotic birds or birds with more exotic names, birds which seem unique or singular or exceptional, like they maybe deserve this one-word moniker that doesn't require any modifiers or qualifiers or descriptors or anything like that. Things like ostrich or kookaburra, cassowary, roadrunner, or kiwi. These very much sound like they could be one-word birds, birds that we just refer to by that one name and we're done with it. The problem is, though, that there are two ostriches in the world, common and Somali ostrich, and they're different from each other. There are 5 kookaburras, with laughing being the one that most people are familiar with, but 4 other species as well, 3 cassowaries, 2 roadrunners, and 5 kiwis. So if you're thinking about kiwi as like a single species by itself, you are way off. There's 4 other species out there that we have to consider as well. So even these sort of crazy, exotic, exciting birds, they don't qualify as one-word birds. They have multi-word names. The reason it's so hard to think about one-word birds or to come up with examples is that they're very rare. There's almost 11,000 species of birds in the world, and only 146 of those species have these special one-word names. That's only 1.4% of all the birds in the world. It's not very many. And the reason for that, when you think about it, is kind of obvious, because if there's almost 11,000 species of bird in the world, it would be pretty much impossible to come up with 11,000 distinct one-word names to refer to these species. So when people name birds, they have to give them names which imply their relationships to other birds, but also distinguish them from those other birds in a way that's unique and that can't be confused with the almost 11,000 others. So most bird names are descriptive or a little bit more complex than just one single word. That problem gives rise to some pretty daunting monikers out there, like Vogelkopf Superb Bird of Paradise, which is a mouthful and a half if you're trying to quickly refer to the bird that you saw in your backyard. I guess you'd have a pretty exciting backyard if that's what you were seeing there. And there's a litany of other very wordy bird names out there, like Middendorf's grasshopper warbler or Himalayan white-browed rosefinch. They're kind of fun in their own right because they are so hefty, and I kind of enjoy that. But you can kind of see where these names come from. If I'm looking at a finch, well, I gotta name it. So I'm probably gonna start with the word finch because that tells us that it is a finch. But maybe it belongs in a group of finches called the warbling finches. So I'm gonna add the word warbling, but then I have to distinguish that finch from the other warbling finches. So I'm gonna call it a black and rufous warbling finch, which is a lot of words and a lot of letters and just a very long way to refer to a bird. We can look at this problem another way if we think about a bird that some people would consider a one-word bird, the sparrowhawk. If you, like me, grew up here in North America, in Ontario, you may have grown up hearing the word sparrowhawk used to describe a very particular little bird, the American kestrel, which lives here in our province. A sparrowhawk is a colloquial name or a sort of familiar name or nickname for the American kestrel. It's a bit confusing because the kestrel is a falcon and not a hawk, although it does like to hunt for small birds like sparrows, so you can sort of see where that name would come from. Now, my father grew up using the word sparrowhawk as if it was that species' proper name. So to him, that's just what that bird was. But we do know that it is a falcon and it belongs in the falcon group, and its actual properly accepted name is American kestrel. So a bit of a misnomer there. Already we're in a bit of trouble. But if you grew up in the United Kingdom, in England, let's say, you would have grown up not knowing the sparrowhawk as an American kestrel, which doesn't live there. You would have referred to a bird which is properly called the Eurasian sparrowhawk. It's a small bird hunting hawk like our sharp-shinned hawk that lives here, and it lives in people's backyards and gardens and woodlots where it hunts birds like sparrows. And its proper name is Eurasian sparrowhawk, but if you are a British birder, you just call this bird sparrowhawk. So we have a lot of confusion going on here already. We have the same bird referred to by, or different birds, I should say, referred to by the same colloquial name in different places. Confusing. But it gets even more confusing when we look at the accipiters, which is the group of birds that the Eurasian sparrowhawk and our sharp-shinned hawk belong to. There's lots of accipiters in the world, but of all these accipiters, there are 18 species who carry the word sparrowhawk in their name. And that includes the Eurasian sparrowhawk, but also 17 others. And they all have to be distinguished from each other. So we have the Eurasian sparrowhawk from Eurasia, and we have the Madagascar sparrowhawk from Madagascar, and the Japanese sparrowhawk from Japan. Some are named after what they look like the red-thighed sparrowhawk or the rufous-necked sparrowhawk. So we have to distinguish these 18 different species, each of which may seem special in the place where it lives, but on a global scale is not unique. It gets even worse if we switch over to goshawk. There's 20 goshawk species in the world. In this group. And actually, outside of this group, there are 7 more species which are not as closely related, which also bear the name goshawk. So there's 27 goshawks in the world, which obviously requires some creative naming. The point of all this is that one-word birds are not common, they're hard to come by, and for good reason. And that makes me really wonder, what is it about these 146 species that makes them special, that make them unique enough or unusual enough or deserving in some way of carrying these rare one-word names in the face of the ornithologist or taxonomist desire to assimilate them and categorize them and classify them like other birds. I'm so interested in this that I started a project way back in 2017. I started a blog because I thought the world must know about this. Everybody else will be interested in this as well. So I'll write a blog and then everybody will read and appreciate one-word birds like I do, and we'll all learn together and it'll be fantastic. As it turns out, maybe it wasn't that broadly interesting to people on the internet. I think I maybe had like 6 regular readers, but that's fine because the 6 of us really enjoyed learning, I think, about one-word birds, and that's all that matters. But when I started the blog, I started with the bird that really got me thinking about one-word birds, the bird that really got me excited about this group of unusual birds. And it's not the one you would think of. You would think that with so many of the 146 birds, the one-word birds, some of them are really incredible. They're spectacular birds with spectacular appearances or behaviors, and in a lot of cases, spectacular names. And you would think it was one of those names that hooked me. You'd think maybe I went for Achmacary, which has a beautiful ring to it. What a great name. And that one would inspire me, but it wasn't the one that grabbed me. You'd think maybe Yellowhammer, I've always said Yellowhammer, or Purloxia, or Golden Face is a good one as well, or Hypocoleus, lots of great names to choose from. But the bird that really grabbed my attention and made me think about this phenomenon or this idea is the dunlin. And I will fully admit to you that it is not the most exciting looking bird on the list. As much as I like dunlin, the dunlin as seen here in its winter plumage, which is how we would mostly see it on migration, is a little bit drab, to be quite honest. And even the name dunlin, it's not that exciting. It's not that evocative or that charismatic. The bird may be named because of its dun-colored plumage. So dun means like grayish brown, which is what we're looking at here. Or it may come from an old Gaelic word, which means something like a hillside pool or something like that. In either case, it doesn't exactly get your motor running, right? It's not that exciting to think about. I will admit that the dunlin looks a little bit better in its breeding plumage, in its summer plumage, where it develops this lovely black belly patch and this beautiful rufous back, but it breeds in the Arctic. So we very rarely get to see it in this full-blown breeding plumage. And instead, we're left with that brown guy from the first slide. And if the name dunlin does come from the dun color, then it was named after that winter plumage anyways, and not this beautiful summer plumage that it does have. I admit that it's actually pretty tricky to start with dunlin here because it's hard for me to actually justify it or give you a reason that it's sort of deserving of its position on this list, especially because the dunlin is a sandpiper and it belongs in a group of other sandpipers, most of which are pretty similar to the dunlin, and most of which have names like pectoral sandpiper and white-rumped sandpiper and semi-palmated sandpiper. Something sandpiper is basically the structure we're working on here, and yet somehow the dunlin has avoided that and gets to be its own sort of special thing. Now, I don't have a good reason for that. I'm not sure why it makes sense. We don't have all the answers when it comes to one-word birds. But what I will say is that when you do get familiar with the dunlin, it kind of starts to work for you. And I think that's partially because the dunlin, although it does look like other sandpipers, is kind of distinct in its own right, partially because of its shape. It's a very sort of plump sandpiper. It's quite round when compared to a lot of its relatives. And it has this beak, which is just a little bit longer and pretty distinctly downward curved. We would say that it's decurved or it droops a little bit. And although that doesn't sound like a lot to go on, if you get into looking at shorebirds, you can actually pick out a dunlin even in its winter plumage at a good distance because of those features. And also on its migration here in North America and also in Europe and Asia, where it also lives, it's pretty common. And that combined with its sort of distinctiveness makes the dunlin a frequent point of comparison. So you might use the dunlin to explain where another bird is. You might say something like, oh, this bird is just to the right of that flock of dunlin. Or you might use the dunlin to explain what that other bird looks like. So you could say something like, oh, the bird I'm looking at is a bit smaller than a dunlin, or it has a shorter bill than a dunlin. And so because it's common and because it's distinct, the dunlin is like a shorebird baseline that we use to help refer to other shorebirds. Now, I don't know if that's why it has a one-word name in the first place. I'm not sure that fully justifies it, but I do think it's interesting that the more you get to know this bird, the more the name kind of fits and you start to think, okay, maybe it deserves that name and it kind of suits it. And that's pretty good. So that's my weak attempt maybe to justify the dunlin and why it belongs on the list. I know it's a little bit drab. It's a drab place to start, but there are some incredibly spectacular and exotic and unusual birds on this list as well. So we're going to look at a few of those too. And when I think of just a weird bird that fits here on the list of one-word birds, the bird I think of is Whatsin. The Whatsin is so weird that it's a little bit hard to get started on when you try to describe it. The Whatsin is like a like a glam rock turkey that lives in the forests of South America, the tropical forests of South America. And it certainly is weird enough just to look at. So we're looking at that big, thick bill, that exposed blue facial skin, that red eye, the crazy mohawk, the shaggy mane. It's a bizarre looking bird to see. But it's even more weird when you know how it lives its life. And the thing you need to know about the Watson is that it eats leaves. And that doesn't seem that weird because we know a lot of animals that eat leaves, but it's very weird for a bird. There are very few birds that are truly leaf eaters. And the reason for that is that leaves are very difficult to digest. And birds in general have a fairly simple digestive system that's just not built for it. But when we think of maybe a mammal that's specialized to eat leaves, something like a cow, you can start to understand the situation. So cows are what we call ruminants, along with some wild cow relatives as well. And ruminants, you may have heard, have 4 stomachs to digest their leafy diet. It's maybe more accurate to say that they have a 4-chambered stomach. And the first chamber of a cow's stomach, the biggest one, is called the rumen. And in the rumen, the cow packs in lots and lots of leaves, and it uses bacteria. So there are bacteria that live in the rumen. The cow is bad at digesting leaves, but the bacteria is very good at it. So the leaves go into the rumen, the bacteria jump in, they break down the leaves, and then slowly that leafy bacteria soupy mixture works its way further down into the cow, and the cow is able to break it down and get some nutrition out of it, and out it goes out the other end. So the cow has this like symbiotic relationship with the bacteria which live in its rumen and do its digestion, a lot of it, for it. Birds don't have a big complicated stomach. Most bird stomachs are pretty small and pretty simple. But what the Watson does have is a crop. And the crop is an organ that a lot of birds have. It's a sac-like organ in the throat. And usually it's very simple and it's just for storing food. But the Watson's crop is enlarged, it's divided, and it's full of bacteria. So just like a cow, the Watson ferments leaves using bacteria in its crop and then sends that fermented mixture down to its stomach. So this bird is a cow trapped in a turkey's body, dressed up for an 80s rock band. It's like no other bird in the whole wide world. I think that makes it pretty spectacular and a pretty great addition to the list. However, I actually think we can go one step further in the credentials of this bird to be a part of this special club. And to do that, we have to know a little bit about its taxonomy. Taxonomy is the way that we sort living things, the way that we categorize them, and we describe who is most closely related to who. And taxonomy has levels. So it's a hierarchical system, meaning there's sort of tiers to it. And to understand how the Watson's taxonomy works, we'll compare it to a species that's more familiar. We'll compare it to a song sparrow, which is a species that you could see in your backyard today. They're probably out there. The most specific level of our taxonomy will sound pretty familiar to you. It's species. So each of our different kinds of birds is assigned a species. And a species is just a single biological unit. It doesn't, for the most part, interbreed with other species. It is one kind of plant or animal that's unique unto itself. And so song sparrow is a species and Watson is a species. So they're equal in that way. Now, as we work up the taxonomy, the next broader level is called genus. So a genus is like a group of very closely related species together. And the song sparrow belongs to a genus called Melospiza. It's not important to know that, but what you should know is that there are 3 species in that genus. So in the genus Melospiza, you have song sparrow, you have swamp sparrow, and you have Lincoln sparrow. And those 3 species are close cousins. They're really closely related together, and that's why they're in the same genus. Some genuses are very big. This one is fairly small, but it has some very close relatives in it. The Watson is in a genus called Opisthocomus, and the genus Opisthocomus has 1 species in it, and that species is the Watson. So right away, he has no close cousins. It's kind of by himself. Our next level up is family. And family is like a broader group of related birds, and a song sparrow belongs in the family Passeridae. That just means sparrows. It actually means the sparrows of the Americas. So there are about 140 species of sparrows in the Americas. They're all vaguely similar as sparrows, but there's a lot of variation too. We have song sparrow. We have something like eastern towhee, which is a pretty different looking sparrow, or a dark-eyed junco, or some buntings. There's lots of different sparrows throughout the Americas that belong in this family, about 140 species. The Hudson is in the family Piscicomidae, and here again, he is alone. He's the only species, there's no family, there's no distant relatives, all by himself. So we have to go a level higher to figure out where these birds relate to each other. The next level up is order. Order is extremely broad. So now we're talking about like a real higher level classification, and song sparrow belongs in the order Passeriformes, which just means perching birds, songbirds. So the Passeriformes has song sparrow, it has American crow, it has northern cardinal, it has willow flycatcher, it has every perching bird and songbird in the world. 6,500 species belong in this order. So it's the largest order of birds, and it's a very, very broad classification. The Hudson belongs in an order called the Piscicomiformes, and if you are not picking up on the pattern by now, oh no, he's there by himself. He's only one. So this bird has no close relatives, he has no distant relatives, he has no long lost cousins, he is by himself. If we go one level higher, the next level up is class, and these birds both belong to the same class, and that class is the birds. So the only thing that makes Hudson like any of the other 11,000 birds is that it is in fact a bird, and it shares no other relation or similarities to any of them. So being truly unique, truly individual and by itself makes this bird maybe about as deserving of a one-word name as a bird can be. Now you don't have to be quite that distinct to fit on the list. There's other ways to get on it as well. And this bird has found maybe a slightly different route to one-word bird fame. This is the shoebill. The shoebill is not, as it appears, a villain from an animated kids movie come to life and walking the earth. It is a real bird, and this bird exists in Central Africa, and it's not a mystery where the name of this bird comes from, because it has a ridiculous beak. And you could compare it to the shape of a shoe or whatever other large object you could think of, but suffice it to say the shoebill's beak is really, really weird. Now, if you're looking at this animal, I love as well, not only does it have a ridiculous beak, but I love the little cartoonish tuft of feathers on the back of its head and its menacing glare. It literally could be out of a Disney movie, and they should include one in a Disney movie sometime soon, I think. But if you're looking at these pictures and you're still not quite sure what kind of bird you're looking at, I should mention that the shoebill has these like long, elegant legs, which it uses to wade. So this is a wading bird, like a heron or an egret or a stork, and it wades through wetlands in its African home in search of fish. And because it has this gargantuan beak, it's able to eat very large fish compared to the other wading birds that live there. One of its favorite foods is lungfish, and it's well within its means to swallow a lungfish that's bigger than its own head. So this bird is able to use that beak with its hook tip and its powerful jaw muscles to great effect on some pretty heavy-duty fish where it lives. Now, the shoebill may seem deserving of its name just because it's a weird bird and it sort of could use to be distinguished in that way. But actually, I think the reason that it hangs on to the name shoebill has more to do with where it fits, or maybe in fact where it doesn't fit in terms of its taxonomy or in terms of where it's related. Because ever since the shoebill was first described, nobody seemed quite clear on where to put it. When it was first described, it was lumped in with the storks, and storks in the 1800s kind of became this weird dumping ground for birds that people didn't know where else to put them. So there was a time we thought that like barn owls were closely related to storks, and turkey vultures were closely related to storks, and they thought that the shoebill was closely related to storks. Now, I admit that for the shoebill, it's much more logical that it would fit with the storks than a turkey vulture or a barn owl, because it does have these long legs like a stork would have. But further research tells us that it's actually probably not closely related to the storks at all, and it may be more closely related to the pelicans, which you can sort of see, or the herons, which you can definitely see. But because nobody's quite sure where to put it, the name remains unmodified. You can imagine if we always knew this bird was a heron, then maybe its name would be shoe-billed heron. Or if we knew for sure that it was a stork, its name would be shoe-billed stork, which would fit with things like open-billed stork and saddle-billed stork. But nobody knew. So it remains the shoebill unspecified, and that's just the way it is. And I'm glad of that. I hope it always stays that way. Now, interestingly, nobody's quite sure where this bird belongs, but one thing that they do seem fairly sure of is that its closest living relative is this bird, which is called a hammercock, which is another one-word bird, which also is really weird in the head department. And also, it's not really clear where to put it. So we have these two one-word birds. weirdos kind of floating around together, and we don't quite know who their other relatives are, but we think they're closely related to each other. And I think that's a pretty great little family group of weirdos, if I do say so myself. Yeah, I see in that chat there, the question, do one-word birds also have one-word names in other languages? They very well might, and some birds do have one-word names in other languages. I wish I was more familiar with the names of birds in some other languages. I'm not, but to give you an example, there's been some talk recently about the name of yellow-breasted chat, which is a maybe warbler that lives here in Ontario. Just like these birds, nobody's quite sure where the yellow-breasted chat fits. And as such, its name and its categorization has been a little bit debated. And there was a suggestion recently that maybe it should be called ocotillo, which is the word that's used for it in Spanish. And so we know that in Spanish, yellow-breasted chat has a one-word name. And I'm sure that birds in other languages have one-word names as well. But my familiarity is only with the English. So I don't know if they're more common or less common in other languages, but it's a very interesting question for sure. All right, so the shoebill definitely fits in this group of one-word birds because it's a mystery. We don't quite know where it belongs. Now, the secretary bird is not a mystery. We know exactly where it belongs. The secretary, or at least we think we do, the secretary bird seems to belong quite nicely with the hawks and the eagles and the other birds in that group. And you can sort of imagine that when you look at it, it looks a bit on the surface like a hawk or an eagle, and so it makes sense that it belongs there. But the secretary bird is set apart from those others simply by looking a bit ridiculous. And so the secretary bird looks like a hawk or eagle, but it looks like a hawk or eagle on stilts. It has these beautiful dancer legs, and those dancer legs make it pretty cumbersome at doing some of the things that hawks and eagles are good at doing. So it's not a particularly graceful flyer, although it can fly. You would think that it would be maybe more graceful on the ground, and it certainly walks okay, but it's a bit of a clumsy runner as well. But those long legs are actually adapted specifically to make it good at hunting in a very unusual way. This bird belongs with the hawks and eagles, but it doesn't grab its prey like the hawks and eagles, instead stomps them. So this bird runs up to a snake or a rodent or even a baby gazelle, because it is over 4 feet tall, so it's a hefty bird, and it stomps them from a standstill, creating a force of up to 5 times its own body weight and crushing the thing that it's stomping on. And that is a unique method of hunting. As far as I know, there's no other bird in the world that stomps its prey to death, and that makes the secretary bird pretty special. But it's not just the stomping that sets this bird apart, it's a particularly striking bird to look at as well. On the face there, we have this beautiful exposed orange facial skin and the yellow around the nose and the edges of the mouth. We have little feathers that look like eyelashes, which are very elegant. And we have that loose, shaggy crest of quills. And that's where the name secretary bird originates, because this bird looks like it's carrying quill pens tucked behind its ears, which a secretary, I suppose, in the era of quill pens might have done. And so the secretary bird gets its name from that. The secretary bird is actually a recent addition to the one-word birds list because it used to be spelled secretary-bird. And it may seem a little bit critical, but I feel that hyphen disqualifies you. You are not on the list if your name is separated by a hyphen. Unfortunately, in 2017, the name was changed to secretary bird, one word as it should be, and the bird enjoys it since then. Now, the secretary bird may not be as taxonomically distinct as the Watson or as mysterious as the shoebill, but simply by looking spectacular, by being different than everything else out there, and by being really iconic of its African savanna habitat, I think it earns the name very, very well. Secretary birds are well regarded in Africa. They have a tendency to hunt venomous snakes and also rodents, which can be a crop pest. And so they're well beloved. And they are also so incredible to look at that they have become the official emblem of different African countries. They appear on stamps and money. They're just a famous bird where they belong. And so I think they earn that one-word name in that regard. Yeah, I see Bev saying that Hammerkop may be an Afrikaans name. Definitely Hammerkop comes from the Afrikaans. And so there are names in English which are derived from other languages. So that's a good example. That's why there was discussion of changing the name of yellow-breasted chat to ocotillo. Even though it is the Spanish name, we could obviously bring that into English as well. And I think that is a very reasonable thing to do in some cases. Okay, I think it's very interesting to think about these spectacular birds. Everybody likes looking at spectacular birds, and weird names and exotic birds with unusual plumage or weird relationships are all very interesting. But it's obvious why those birds get to be one-word birds. It's obvious why they have distinctive names that separate them from all the other birds. But to me, it's more interesting to think about the birds on the one-word birds list that might surprise you. And I think this is one that might surprise a lot of folks. Even if you're familiar with it, you probably never thought of it as being special or unique or different. And that is the gadwall. Now, the gadwall is a duck. And actually, ducks do pretty well in the one-word bird department if you think about it, because there are lots of them. We have mallard, for example, which is probably the most commonly seen one-word bird in the whole world. We have things like canvasback or redhead, bufflehead, or smew. So there's lots of ducks that have one-word names. And I think that's probably partially because ducks are very charismatic and mostly they're fairly colorful and obvious and nice to look at. It might also be because of the history of hunting with ducks, helping these sort of colloquial names persist and become proper common names in their own right. But for whatever reason, the gadwall gets one. And people generally are not always that impressed when they see a gadwall, I have to say. Actually, the gadwall, I include the gadwall in this in a prominent way for a very personal reason. It has to do with a friend of mine named Kevin. And I give you his name, his real name, for a very good reason, which I will mention shortly. But I was birding once with Kevin and a group of friends, and we were looking at some ducks and just sort of picking through the ducks for the day. And I noticed a gadwall. And so I put my scope on the gadwall and I said to the group I was with, well, the scope is on a gadwall there. If you want to see gadwall for your day list, get your first gadwall of the day. And a few people looked and they sort of made some comment or whatever it is. And Kevin notably did not look in the scope. And I said to Kevin, you don't want to look at a gadwall? And he turned to me and he said, it's not much of a duck, really. And I don't think I'd ever thought twice about a gadwall to that point. But when Kevin said it's not much of a duck, really, I became the staunchest defender the gadwall has ever known. And it precipitated a very lengthy debate. At one point, Kevin turned to me and he said, the gadwall is the Coors Light of ducks, which to me as a beer drinker was an insult so egregious I could not let it go. And the debate raged on for some time. And to this day, a solid decade later, I continue to tell this story and to implicate Kevin by name so that if you ever meet him, you can tell him how beautiful the gadwall is. I do think that Kevin was joking and probably likes gadwalls just fine, but I can't ever let him forget his transgression against this lovely duck. But I will admit that when you look at a gadwall, it doesn't look that exciting. The female in the back here, she is brown and mottled, which is like every female duck everywhere. But even the male, to most people, when they see him for the first time, he's just gray. The truth is, though, that if you take a closer look at this fellow, he's actually quite dapper in his own right. The shade of gray changes all over the body. It's intricately marked with these little white scallops and lines. He's got that lovely brown head. The feathers on top of the wings, on the upper surface of the wings, are a sort of fawn, tawny color, really almost peachy. The rump is black, both on the top and the bottom surface, which is a good field mark for gadwall if you're watching them out there in nature. And the feet, although they're often hidden under the water, are brilliant yellow, the brightest part of the whole duck. I think the name gadwall does this bird a great service. I don't know why he got it in the first place. Whatever name the word gadwall, or whatever meaning I should say, the word gadwall originally had is long lost to history. Nobody seems to know. But I think the fact that he has a special name makes you take a second look at this bird. I think if the gadwall was called Eastern gray duck, nobody would look twice at it. You'd be like, ah, it's just a gray duck, and you'd let it go. But I think because it's called gadwall, it lends it a sort of air of mystery or maybe an air of importance, and it makes people look at it more closely. And I have been in the middle of defending gadwall to somebody and had people jump in and say, of course, gadwall is amazing. You just have to look at it closely. Look at the feathers on its back. Look at the patterns in its flanks. And so people get kind of passionate about this bird. And I really firmly believe that the name is a part of the reason why. And this is, I feel like I get perilously close in a situation like this to having a point. But I think that names really matter. The names that we call birds are really important. And I think this is why they fascinate me, because I really do believe that when you give a bird like gadwall a special name, it gives people an opportunity to connect with them in a different way. As an environmental educator, I spent a lot of time thinking about how to get people connecting to nature. And I used to work with a fellow who could be a bit pedantic at times, but he used to say things like, you can't make somebody connect to nature. You can only provide them the opportunity to make their own connection. And I think that's what a name like gadwall is. It's an opportunity. It's a gateway or an open door to form your own connection to this bird, to explore and to learn more about it. And so I think that's why names really matter. I think a great example of that for me personally is killdeer. Oh, that's 2 slides on. I have a real connection to killdeer, and I always have. I think when you talk to people who are into bird watching, they like to talk about their spark bird. So if you got into bird watching, especially as an adult, you might remember having a spark bird, a bird that sort of caught your attention and made you get excited about birds and got you into the hobby of bird watching. Well, for me, I don't have a spark bird. I was fortunate, I suppose, to be raised by a bird watching father. And so I don't remember when I started bird watching because it's long before I have any memories. So it's always been a part of my life. But what I have in place of a spark bird is this sort of vague sense of being connected to certain species of birds at a very young age. And one of those species is killdeer. I think it's one of the first birds I learned to identify. I think I probably learned to identify the killdeer before I learned to identify a lot of members of my extended family. And I just remember feeling connected to it at a young age. And I believe very strongly that a big part of the reason for that is the name killdeer. Now, the name killdeer, it doesn't really make any sense, but it's supposed to be an onomatopoetic reference to the sound the bird makes. So killdeer are very vocal, they're very noisy, they scream, they chatter, they make all kinds of sounds. And one of their common calls is a 2-noted call, which is supposed to sound like killdeer, killdeer. And you do have to use your imagination to hear it. I'm not going to lie to you. I think we could use just about any 2-syllable word and it would fit the call just as well. But somebody at some point thought, well, that sounds like he's saying killdeer, and that's what became the name of the bird. And I think as a child, learning the name killdeer, learning that it was associated with the call of the bird, and therefore learning the call as well, was really made me feel like I knew this bird, like I knew something about it that had insight into its life. And it really was a gateway into exploring that bird a little deeper, to watching them run across an open rocky field, foraging for insects, to watch them do their feigning broken wing display to distract a would-be predator, in this case me, from the location of their nest. I think it was a springboard to let me dive into this bird in a deeper way. And I often wonder if the bird was called northern double-collared plover or something like that, if I would have been as excited about it or as interested in it as a child. And so I think these names really do give us the opportunity to dive in, even at a young age, or if we're not birders, and to get to know these birds in a better way. Incidentally, when I was writing my OneWordBirds blog and I wrote the post about killdeer, my father confessed to me that he had an almost identical connection to this bird also at a very young age. So 40 years before me, he was connecting to killdeer and exploring killdeer and learning about them when he was very young, probably because that name was so evocative and so unusual and helped him to connect to this bird. Now, this brings me very neatly to my final bird of the day, and that bird is the lammergeier. And I would finish with no other bird than this one, because when I started the project, when I started writing about OneWordBirds, it was the Dunlin that got me started. But the bird that lived in my mind, the blog post that I had already written mentally 100 times, was the lammergeier. And the name lammergeier all by itself is an incredible place to start. It's so evocative. It's so unusual. The lammergeier could be like a medieval monster that haunts castles or something like that. It sounds absolutely mythical. And the bird looks mythical. It does not look real. It doesn't look like it should belong here on Earth. It should be in some weird fantasy movie or something like that. The lammergeier is a vulture. And so it's similar in some ways to the other vultures of Europe and Africa and Asia, but also in many ways, it's very different. It has a fully feathered face, which most of the vultures do not. The face is white and adorned with this black streak, which terminates in this little fuzzy beard under the chin. It has a bright, pale yellow eye with a red eye ring, this gorgeous peachy colored plumage all along its scruffy back and neck feathers and down onto the breast and belly. It has fully feathered legs, and it's just a massive, powerful, incredible looking bird. And the name and the bird just seem to mesh so perfectly together that it's such an obvious addition. It's such an obvious part of this list and this club. But the spectacular nature or the unusual nature of the lammergeier doesn't stop simply with the way it looks or the way the name sounds, also extends to how the bird lives its life. Now, it is a vulture, so it does eat dead stuff. but it does it differently than a lot of the other vultures. Most vultures prefer their dead things to be relatively fresh, although they have a reputation for eating things that are rotting or putrid or old, and they are able to do that in some cases. Their preference is for things that are fairly freshly dead. So if you're in the mountains of northern Spain and there's a dead sheep on the mountain, well, most of the vultures there, they're going to fly in and get into that dead sheep as quickly as they can. They're going to eat the meat, they're going to eat the organs, they're going to try to beat all the other vultures and all the other scavengers. But not the lammergeier. The lammergeier is going to wait. He's going to just circle around on the breeze. He's going to stay close, but he's going to wait until those other vultures have had their fill. And when they're done, he's going to move in and pick up not the meat of that dead sheep, but the bones. And he's going to eat them in one piece. If he can swallow them, he's just going to gulp them down. No problem at all. That could include, this appears to be the foot of a sheep or a calf or something. No problem. He's going to gulp down the foot. He's going to eat the ribs. He's going to eat the limb bones, the back bones. Doesn't matter. He'll eat them all. And if the bones are too big for him to swallow, and he can swallow some alarmingly large bones, that's okay, because he's going to pick them up. He's going to fly them aloft in his rocky mountainous habitat, and he's going to drop them from the sky until they shatter on the rocks below, and then he can fly down and eat the shards. And this bird lives on 90% a diet of bones. It's unlike any other bird in the world. There's nobody else that does this. It's absolutely bizarre. And it just adds to the mystique. This bone-eating vulture from the old world just is such a spectacular thing. Now, unfortunately, the lammergeier, in a way, is no more, because in 2016, I decided I was going to write this blog, and I made myself a little list and I got excited to write about the lammergeier. And then I kind of got distracted for a year. And in 2017, I returned and I recompiled the list using the most up-to-date bird checklist, because they are updated every year. And I noticed the lammergeier missing. And that's because they changed the name of this bird from lammergeier to bearded vulture. And I know there are more significant issues and concerns in the world today by a mile and a half. But the change of this bird's name to bearded vulture just struck me like an arrow. I couldn't believe that they would do that to this incredible creature. Not that there's anything wrong with being a vulture. I love vultures to death, but it seemed like such a loss for me personally, selfishly, but also for the bird itself and for birds in general. I think maybe the biggest reason for that is that the lammergeier, like other vultures of Europe and Africa and Asia, is declining. It's in trouble. It's becoming endangered and it needs help. And the problem with getting people to help vultures is they don't tend to like them very much, because they're associated with death or things that are gross or things that are scary. People aren't really fond of vultures. So when you run around trying to get people to help vultures, it's hard to get them concerned about it. So what you need is for people to connect with vultures, for people to empathize with these birds and to feel that they're important and cool and valuable. And if you're trying to get people excited about a bearded vulture, it just doesn't sound that exciting. But you have the opportunity to get people riled up about a lammergeier, and you threw that opportunity away. And it kind of kills me, because I just feel like what a golden opportunity that was to provide people this chance to connect with this incredible bird. Now, this kind of brings me to the awkward conclusion of my talk, because when I started this talk, I really thought I had like a point and I was going to finish with that point. But the problem is that in a way, my point is that birds should have interesting one-word names. And unfortunately, I am not able to change that, and probably neither are any of you. So it's kind of hard to know what to leave you with there, because I want to talk to the people. I love talking to you folks. It's beautiful, but I also want to talk to the people who are in charge and who can actually influence the names. And I don't really know how to do that. But I also want to have a take home for everybody, because I have to feel that we can take action on the loss, the disappearance of these one-word birds. And it's interesting that right now there is a movement afoot to sort of change bird names. That movement is called Bird Names for Birds. And that movement has arisen not to defend one-word birds, but to address a different issue in the naming of birds, and that is honorific bird names. And by honorific bird names, I mean birds that are named after people. So something like Wilson's warbler or Leach's storm petrel. These birds are named after people. And it's really not great that they are, because most of these birds were named centuries ago, a century and a half, 2 centuries ago, by people for other people who were sort of part of a little old boys club. And a lot of the people the birds are named after are white colonists. They're often people who have some checkered history or questionable past. Some of them were slave owners. Some of them were Confederates in the Civil War. It's not a club of people that you really want to be naming birds after in a lot of cases. And certainly it's not a group of people that's very representative of all the people who appreciate birds today. So this Bird Names for Birds movement, it seeks to change some of those names or all of those names ultimately, and to give them bird names instead of people names. So names that are descriptive about what they are, names that help people to connect. And I think this is the perfect place for a discussion about what those names might become and about what names work and what names don't. And on the periphery of this, we've seen discussions arise about bird names that just don't make a lot of sense, like birds that are named after fairly small geographic points, like Nashville warbler, which is a weird one, or birds that have names that don't really accurately describe them, like ring-necked duck. So there's room here. There's a movement afoot now to change bird names. And I think this is where we can start the conversation and really advocate for names that have the potential to evoke emotion, to connect people to these animals, and to get people thinking about birds in a different and better way. And so what I would encourage you to do, if you find this interesting, if you care about this at all, is to be part of that conversation. You can find Bird Names for Birds through this hashtag on social media. You can Google Bird Names for Birds and get their website. You can chat with your friends. You can start thinking about bird names and being part of the conversation, thinking about names you like, names you don't like, and what we can do to kind of make names better as a whole. We definitely can't come up with evocative, charismatic names for 11,000 species, but I think we can for some. And I think that provides a beautiful springboard to get people into birds and to get people excited about conserving them and helping them and making the world a better place for birds in the future. So I hope that you'll think more about the names going forward, be part of the conversation, and dive in, and maybe when you get the chance, defend OneWordBirds and advocate for maybe a few more as well. Now that brings me to the end of my talk today. If you have any questions at all, I'm more than happy to answer them. If you are not tired of talking about OneWordBirds, I can talk about OneWordBirds all day. If you do want to connect with me online, you can. As was mentioned at the beginning, I have a new blog called CanadianWoodcock.com. Maybe best not to bother asking about the name, but you can find the OneWordBirds blog is all archived there. I didn't get through them all, but there's a bunch there. So if you really want to read more about OneWordBirds, you can. And you can find me on social media at Canadian_Woodcock, CDN_Woodcock. So feel free to connect with me there as well. And otherwise, thank you so much for tuning in. Any questions at all, I'm happy to answer them. And otherwise, have a wonderful rest of your evening, everybody.
Thanks a lot, Kyle. That was really interesting. I like that idea of renaming birds, because I've been having trouble explaining to people why the red-bellied woodpecker is not the red-headed woodpecker.
Yeah, I think we can all probably think of some birds we'd like to have renamed. It's funny, I think people think they don't have strong opinions about bird names, but as soon as you get people started, they tend to have strong opinions about bird names, and we could definitely do better with some of them for sure.
I'm just going to check the chat. Looks like it's mostly people who greatly enjoyed your talk, but if anyone does have any questions, put them in, or where we are. And we're a small group, so you could even unmute yourself and ask your question if you want. So any questions out there for Kyle? No? So I think everybody thoroughly enjoyed it. Oh
yeah, Gary, so is the dodo a one-named bird? It absolutely is a one-named bird, but sadly is no longer with us. But yeah, the dodo would fit on the list as well. I believe actually the dodo is still officially on the list, even though we know it to be extinct. Some extinct birds are still listed. So yeah, dodo for sure. And how deserving is the dodo? Like, fantastically.
And someone asked,
yeah, what are some other one-named birds? There's a lot. There are 146. I can't name them all for you, but some of them, maybe more familiar ones here in North America, would be some of those ducks like mallard and bufflehead and stuff. We have bobolink, which I know somebody just mentioned there in the chat. There's dovekie, which is a little alcid, like a little puffin that lives on the West Coast. I'm trying to think of some other maybe familiar ones. Emu would be a very familiar one for a lot of people. The emu is a one-named bird, even though its cousin, the ostrich, is not. Yeah, what else? There's probably lots, and I'm just blanking on now. And there's lots that you've never heard of. There's birds with weird names like mallee fowl and bellicus and battler. There's a one that I really enjoy, an eagle, a snake eagle from Africa. Lots and lots of different ones. But yeah, I recommend, I don't know if I've ever put the full list anywhere. Maybe I should, because there's not really a good way to look it up. I had combed through the entire checklist of birds to find them all. So, but yeah, lots and lots of good ones out there. And Jan, where did bobolink get its name? You know, I actually don't know where the name bobolink comes from. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that it has something to do with trying to represent the sound that bobolink makes, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I'd have to double check. And yeah, Raya, there's 146 is the current number of one-word birds. It changes a little bit every year because sometimes a one-word bird will get split. So you'll have a bird with a one-word name that gets split into two species. So they end up having two names that are multiple words. Or sometimes you get them back. So last year, they actually split an Australian owl species, and one of the species didn't originally have a one-word name, but one of the splits they named the moorpork, which is a colloquial name for this owl species, a goofy name too, moorpork, which just like the killdeer is supposed to be the sound that it makes. So we gained a one-word bird last year. So it does happen. You get them back sometimes as well. If anybody's really dying for the list, I can send you the list. Sadly, whippoorwill, no. So whippoorwill is actually the eastern whippoorwill. So it is not a one-word bird, and it's spelled with hyphens typically, same with its cousin, the chuckquill's widow. For me, the hyphens disqualify. I don't think it counts, but you know, I guess everybody can draw their own line. Hawaii is the home to a bunch of one-word birds as well, which are named in the Hawaiian language. But interestingly, in the Hawaiian language, they use diacriticals like little marks. But then when those names get assimilated into English, they drop the diacriticals. So the shortest name on the one-word birds list is the O'u, which is just spelled O-U. In Hawaii, it gets a little apostrophe thing in there as well. But there's lots in Hawaii. Yeah, puffin, no, Atlantic puffin, and some other species as well. Veery, yes. So veery is a one-word bird. That's a good one. Awesome. Yeah, one-name mammals I thought about a little bit as well, Greg, for sure. I'm not as into mammals personally, but yeah, you could absolutely do one-name mammals too. I wonder if there's more or fewer. I kind of suspect there might be more, but I'm not sure why I think that. But that would be interesting to look into. There are far fewer species of mammals in total, but I think there's probably some one-word ones for sure. Like binturong, yeah. Apparently binturong smells like popcorn. That's the only fact I know about binturong, and I give that to you with no context because I don't have any.
So I'm not seeing too many more questions. That's really a great talk. So Kyle has kindly agreed to have this recording go up onto the YouTube channel. So if you want to see it again, or you have friends you'd like to show it to, it'll be, usually we're up on YouTube within the week of when the recording does. So you'll be able to see that, and there are other recordings there. And then hopefully we'll all get to see each other in person someday, but not this spring.
Someday.
So thanks a lot, Kyle. It looks like from the messages, everybody greatly enjoyed it. So, and thanks so much for stepping in at the last minute.
Always happy to do it. I think I'm the only excited person when a speaker cancels. Not that I'm excited not to have that speaker, but I do love the opportunity to chat with everybody. So thanks so much for having me. It was really a pleasure.
Okay, so thanks. And everybody, there will be the talks for next month, and we'll have some activities to do too, and hope we all have a great Easter. So bye-bye, and thanks all.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye, Kyle.